Welcome. Whether you are prepping for a big meeting today, or maybe catching up on the latest ideas in cognitive theory, or you are just insanely curious about how the human mind actually processes the world, you are in the exact right place.
You really are.
Yeah.
It's a genuinely disruptive piece of writing we are examining today.
Yeah.
It doesn't just, question what we know. It actively interrogates the very mechanisms we use to prove that we know it.
Exactly. So for you, the learner listening right now, we are taking a deep dive into a brief yet incredibly dense excerpt from a Substack by Jaime Hoerricks, PhD.
Right.
The piece is titled Before the Field Guide, Notes from the Fey Side of the Forest. And our mission for this deep dive is to unpack what it actually means to possess a pattern-first mind.
And why traditional linear frameworks of sharing information, the structures that are practically built into the foundations of our educational and corporate systems, why they frequently fail individuals who process reality differently.
Yeah, fail them completely in some cases.
Oh, absolutely. And setting the stage for you as you listen, it is vital to recognize the core tension running through this source material.
The struggle of mapping a non-traditional mind.
Exactly. Hoerricks is grappling with this profound struggle of mapping a nonlinear mind using the traditional, rigid categories demanded by the academic and publishing worlds.
Right, because they want everything in a neat little box.
They do. So this text is not merely a theoretical exercise, it is a really forceful argument for fundamentally altering how we expect data and lived experience and insight to be packaged and delivered.
It really highlights that friction, doesn't it, between the complex, unmapped terrain of human cognition and the highly sterilized containers society prefers to use.
Sterilized is the perfect word for it.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Right in the subtitle, Hoerricks frames the project as writing from within gestalt cognition to prepare the terrain for a field guide to pattern-first ways of knowing. Let's establish some parameters here for the listener. When the text uses gestalt and pattern first in the specific context, how should we be conceptualizing that cognitive process?
So in cognitive terms, a gestalt approach, or a pattern-first way of knowing, signifies a stark departure from sequential bottom-up processing.
The step-by-step stuff.
Right. The analytic tradition heavily favors a linear sequence. You gather isolated fact A, you combine it with isolated fact B.
And systematically deduce conclusion C.
Exactly. But a pattern-first mind, however, engages in rapid top-down processing. It perceives the overarching architecture of a concept.
The big picture.
The interconnected web, the entire constellation of ideas before it registers the individual data points.
It just grasps the complex whole instantly.
Instantly.
Hmm.
Which sometimes makes it incredibly difficult for that mind to later deconstruct its own intuitive leap into the sequential steps that an analytic observer demands.
And that immediately makes me think of the classic workplace scenario. You have an employee who instantly sees the solution to a really complex logistical problem.
Oh, I've seen this happen so many times.
Right. But when the manager asks them to show their work or put it into a step-by-step PowerPoint deck, they completely freeze.
Because the solution arrived as a complete picture.
Not a series of bullet points.
That is a perfect real-world application. And that is why Hoerricks uses this specific metaphor early in the text. Quote, "Before the field guide can exist, the ground must be cleared."
The ground must be cleared.
If you are attempting to create a guide to navigating this pattern-first landscape, you cannot simply lay a traditional grid map over it.
The grid doesn't fit the terrain.
It doesn't. The foundational labor requires hacking away the dense underbrush of analytic assumptions. You have to clear the terrain of the expectation that thought must be linear before you can even begin to accurately describe how a pattern-first mind operates.
The methodology Hoerricks uses to clear this ground is where the text gets particularly provocative, I think.
It really pushes boundaries.
It does. To build this new framework, the author explicitly relies on autotheory, autoethnography, memory, and lived experience.
The internal data.
Yeah. Now, let me play devil's advocate for a moment.
Go for it.
If I am steeped in the traditional scientific method, I am looking for objective, replicable data. I want the observer separated from the subject.
Of course.
So how is relying on subjective memory and autoethnography not just, academic journaling? Where is the rigor?
It is a totally valid critique from the standpoint of the analytic tradition. And it is exactly the critique Hoerricks is anticipating here.
Okay.
The analytic tradition is built on Cartesian dualism, the strict separation of the mind observing from the matter being observed.
The researcher in the lab coat looking through the glass.
Precisely. But Hoerricks is arguing a profound epistemological point. When the subject you are studying is your own gestalt cognition, that separation is functionally impossible.
Because you can't step outside your own brain.
You cannot step outside of your own brain to objectively measure its holistic processing. So autoethnography isn't merely journaling. It is a rigorous qualitative method that uses the researcher's highly contextualized personal experience to analyze and critique wider cultural and structural norms.
So the argument is that the traditional demand for an objective distance actually distorts the very phenomenon being studied.
Exactly. If you try to study gestalt cognition purely from the outside, using standardized diagnostic criteria, it is like trying to understand the ecosystem of a deep-sea trench by dragging a few specimens up to a sterile laboratory in a net.
Oh, wow.
The pressure changes, the environment is gone, and what you are left looking at doesn't behave the way it does in its native terrain.
It's just a dead fish on a table at that point.
Exactly, it's lifeless. Hoerricks is insisting on the labor of naming gestalt cognition from within. The lived experience is the primary, indispensable data set.
This friction between the native terrain and the sterile laboratory brings us to a very practical hurdle mentioned in the text.
The question of the book format.
Yes. Hoerricks addresses a deceptively simple question that early readers and editors often bring to a manuscript like this. They ask, what kind of book is this going to be?
Which is a question that reveals the deep biases of our information economy.
How so?
Well, that question is rarely just about format. It is about categorization, marketing, and shelf placement. It is about taking complex thought and forcing it through an industrial sorting machine.
And as a culture, we are obsessively reliant on those sorting machines.
We really are.
Speaking personally, if I receive a corporate email that isn't cleanly divided into an introduction, 3 bullet points, and a clear call to action, I experience a mild sense of panic.
We all do. We've been trained to need information pre-sorted.
But for a piece of writing emerging from pattern-first cognition, demanding a definitive category is a massive structural roadblock.
It is a roadblock because those categories are artifacts of what the text refers to as analytic traditions.
Right.
Hoerricks sets up a fascinating dichotomy here between these analytic traditions and what the piece calls the fey side of the forest.
I love that phrase, the fey side of the forest.
It's evocative. And the fey side isn't meant to imply something fictional or magical. It is a metaphor for a complex, nonlinear ecosystem that operates on its own internally consistent yet wildly different logic.
It is a space where variables are intrinsically entangled.
Yes, while the analytic traditions demand that ideas sit neatly inside assigned containers.
The text explicitly lists the usual suspects for these containers: a therapy manual, research monograph, memoir, theoretical argument.
The expectation is that you pick a lane and stay in it.
Right. If you are sharing data and literature reviews, you write a research monograph. If you are sharing personal trauma or lived experience, you write a memoir.
And you don't get to mix the two without making the reader deeply uncomfortable.
But we have to interrogate why that discomfort exists. Why do we demand these neat containers?
It is fundamentally for the cognitive ease of the consumer, not for the accuracy or integrity of the subject matter.
That makes a lot of sense.
The analytic tradition wants to dissect the frog to understand how the muscles work. But in doing so, it sacrifices the life of the frog.
You lose the organism to understand the parts.
Precisely. Hoerricks is making the case that if you try to force the holistic, deeply interconnected reality of the fey side of the forest into the rigid, chapter-by-chapter structure of a formal research monograph, you effectively destroy the very patterns you are trying to document.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This leads us to a fascinating structural choice Hoerricks makes in the text. The author introduces a poem.
A very bold move.
Now, the excerpt we are working from doesn't actually include the text of the poem itself, but it does include Hoerricks' subsequent analysis of why a poem was necessary right in the middle of a theoretical discussion.
The rationale is key here.
The author writes, quote, "After writing the poem below, I realize it is doing several kinds of work at once," and then explicitly states that the poem resists that expectation deliberately.
It refuses to be siloed.
Exactly. It refuses to be just a therapy manual or just a memoir or just theory. It operates as all of them simultaneously.
This is a critical juncture in the text. When the analytic world encounters a poem embedded in a theoretical or scientific text, the knee-jerk reaction is often to dismiss it.
They see it as fluff.
Right. It is viewed as an artistic flourish, a momentary lack of academic rigor, or an act of deliberate provocation. But Hoerricks makes a profound and necessary clarification regarding this resistance to categorization.
They state that refusing to fit into the analytic containers is not an act of rebellion.
Rather, it is an act of honesty.
I want to push back on that slightly, or at least explore the friction there for the listener.
Let's do it.
If an author completely abandons the established conventions of their field, say, submitting a poem where peer reviewers expect a literature review, isn't that inherently rebellious? If we abandon these categories entirely, doesn't the pursuit of shared knowledge just devolve into a disorganized mess where no one can effectively communicate?
That is the exact fear that keeps the analytic traditions firmly in power.
The fear of chaos.
Yes. But let's look closely at Hoerricks' framing of honesty. Rebellion implies that you recognize the ultimate authority and utility of the rules, but you are choosing to break them to make a political point, or to be contrarian.
You are fighting the system just to fight it.
Exactly. Honesty, in this context, implies something much deeper. It implies that the rules themselves are fundamentally inadequate, or even false, for the specific reality being described.
So it is a matter of the map needing to match the territory.
Exactly. If a specific human mind does not work in neat, isolated sequential boxes, then presenting a map of that mind using neat, isolated sequential boxes is intellectually dishonest.
It's faking the data to fit the template.
Yes. To force gestalt cognition into the standard format of a research monograph wouldn't just be dry. It would be a misrepresentation of the data. It would be a lie.
Wow.
The poem, because it can hold multiple overlapping meanings and emotional resonances simultaneously, is actually the more rigorous, honest map of the Fey side of the forest.
That reframes the entire concept of what constitutes rigorous research.
It really is.
It suggests that our relentless drive to categorize might actually be blinding us to the true nature of what we are studying. It forces you to look at the ways you consume information on a daily basis.
We are so heavily conditioned to expect the straight line.
Point A leads logically to point B, which concludes at point C.
And Hoerricks literally severs that expectation in the final moments of this excerpt.
The closing of the text is a brilliant piece of structural performativity. It doesn't just describe the theory, it forces the reader to experience it.
I was so struck by that ending.
Let me read the final sentence exactly as it appears in the source material. It goes, quote, "The writing you've been reading across these series have not been a straight." And it just ends.
Just ends.
There is no period. There is no final noun. It just drops off into blank space, right where every analytic instinct in our brains is screaming for the word line or path or trajectory.
It is a jarring stylistic disruption, and that is entirely the point.
It really is.
By cutting the sentence off abruptly, the author denies the reader the satisfying logical conclusion that the analytic tradition promises. You are forced to step out of the comfortable linear progression of thought and actually sit in the unresolved, unpredictable nature of the Fey side of the forest.
The form of the writing becomes the function of the argument.
It is incredibly effective.
When I read that missing word, my brain physically hitched for a second. It really makes you reflect on the architecture of your own cognition.
It forces the mirror up to the reader.
If you are listening to this right now, consider how you actually acquire and synthesize new information. Do you truly learn in a perfectly straight, unimpeded line?
Very few people do, honestly.
Right. Or do you learn laterally? Do you make sudden, seemingly illogical jumps, perhaps connecting a memory from your childhood to a complex economic theory you read about yesterday, which then contextualizes a conversation you had this morning?
Most people, when they truly analyze their own thought processes, realize that profound insight rarely arrives on a predictable schedule via a straight path.
It's messy.
It is messy. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the ultimate synthesis of Hoerricks' point. To truly understand pattern-first, gestalt ways of experiencing the world, we must develop the capacity to tolerate ambiguity.
We have to get comfortable with the unresolved.
We have to be willing to abandon the safety of linear research. Relying solely on the sterile, highly controlled environment of the analytic tradition means we're only ever seeing a fraction of human potential.
It requires us to broaden our definition of what academic and scientific tools look like.
It does. We have to embrace multifaceted intersectional tools. We must allow poetry, lived memory, autoethnography, and autotheory to stand alongside quantitative data in our academic and scientific spaces.
Because the standard tools just aren't capturing the whole picture.
Right. Because for certain landscapes, like the internal workings of a pattern-first mind, those non-traditional methods are the only tools sensitive enough to accurately map the terrain.
It also shifts the burden of effort, doesn't it?
What do you mean?
Well, a straight linear argument is passive for the reader. You just get on the train at point A and let the author drive you to point C.
Ah, yes.
But a pattern requires active engagement. It requires you to step back, survey the whole picture, and find the connective tissue yourself. It asks the reader to participate in the gestalt cognition.
That is a crucial observation. The analytic tradition spoon-feeds the conclusion. The Fey side of the forest requires you to co-create the meaning.
It's an active partnership.
It is a more demanding way to read and a more demanding way to interact with the world, but it yields a much richer, more holistic understanding.
Okay, as we start to pull these threads together and wrap up this deep dive, let's look at the overarching journey we just took through this dense material.
It's been quite a journey.
Dr. Jaime Hoerricks is taking on a monumental, foundational task, clearing the analytical underbrush to write a field guide for pattern-first minds. Rather than capitulating to the publishing industry's demand to force gestalt cognition into tidy, analytic containers, like a standard therapy manual or conventional memoir, the author is mapping the terrain from the inside out.
By utilizing internal, lived experiences through autoethnography and poetry.
Exactly. Hoerricks insists that resisting traditional categories is not an act of academic rebellion. It is an act of profound, necessary honesty about how a nonlinear mind actually operates.
Beautifully said.
And through that brilliant, trailing, unresolved final sentence, we are viscerally reminded that the path to true understanding is rarely, if ever, a straight line.
And as we leave you today, I want to offer a final thought for you to explore on your own.
I love this part.
It builds directly upon the structural critique in Hoerricks' text, but expands it outward into the macroscopic world we all navigate daily. Consider the vast, rigid infrastructures that govern our society.
The big systems.
Yes. If our entire educational system, our hiring practices, our corporate hierarchies, and our professional development worlds are built almost exclusively on these analytic traditions, systems that relentlessly demand straight lines, standardized testing, neat quarterly reports, and strict, inflexible job categories.
Which they absolutely are.
How many groundbreaking pattern-first insights are we systemically filtering out?
Wow.
How many paradigm-shifting solutions are we completely missing simply because we are forcing diverse human cognition into the wrong containers?
That is haunting.
How much sheer brilliance is being discarded because our institutions demand a standardized research monograph when what we actually need to survive the complexities of the modern world is a map of the Fey side of the forest?
That is a phenomenal question to carry with you. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the structures around you, keep looking for the broader patterns, and we will catch you next time.